Hey pirate fans around the world, this is Tortuga, the Wild Pirate Hub film versus history. Tortuga wasn't just a party set in the movies. It was a strategic launchpad where buccaneers, merchants, and governors gambled with empires. This story offers a clear side-by-side tour of Tortuga, as seen on screen and as recorded in archives, where the island truly sits on the map. How it rose, what codes and shares governed crews, who the famous captains were, how money flowed, and why this small rock became one of the most argued over points in the Caribbean. The saga's bar brawls, fast crew recruiting, and lawless nights will be tested against forts, permits, militias, and letters of marque. The driving question is simple: how close is the saga's Tortuga to the historical island? And how did the real port actually work? The stakes were real. One misread channel meant a wreck. One shrewd governor or pirate pact meant fortune. Whole policies shifted in European capitals because of what happened here. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with pirate stories whenever you want. Quick fact: Tortuga is not a fantasy. It's a real island off the north coast of Haiti, close enough to Hispaniola's markets and mountains to matter, and far enough from heavy patrols to be tempting. Quick fact: its boom drew strength from currents, anchorages, and a geography that favored shallow draft raiders over deep draft pursuers. Quick fact: the word buccaneer began with island hunters who smoked meat on boucan before many took to the sea. Quick fact: governors licensed raiding when it suited alliances, then shut it down when treaties demanded a smile for old enemies. Quick fact: taverns did exist, and some nights were wild, but rules, shares, and paperwork often controlled more than fists did. Two questions guide the hour. What did a real Tortuga night look like? And how did politics, not just rum, make the island powerful? The promise is straightforward. Film versus history checkpoints appear throughout, so the screen can be lined up with the shoreline in plain daylight. On screen, Tortuga often appears as a hazy, timeless den, where a captain can stumble off a boat and gather a full crew by nightfall, as if the island were a grin that never sleeps. The camera points to a waterfront of flickering lanterns, ships at awkward angles, and a chorus of fights that flare and vanish. The map tells a tidier story. Tortuga rides just off Haiti's north coast, a turtleback of land with usable anchorages and waters that change color and depth with the kind of speed that rewards local knowledge. A frigate with a deep keel risks the shoals. A sloop with a shallow draft dances through. The winds here are trades reliable enough to plan by, and the currents bend around headlands in ways a chart cannot fully capture with ink. Films love chaos, charts love order. Both in their way are true to the place. Geography is the island's secret script. Close to Hispaniola's northern settlements, Tortuga could buy grain, cattle, timber, and information. The channels between islets and reefs make natural filters. A heavy warship, swift in a straight line, might hesitate where a lighter raider slips by with the lead line calling out safe water. The lee side offers anchorage in the trades, squalls pass, and a harbor remains. A shallow cut saves a sloop 20 minutes. A deep draft pursuer must go the long way around. Chase scenes in the films capture this feeling, narrow escapes through unlikely gaps. But the real gaps are not gifts from the script. They are corridors found by soundings and memorized by pilots who earned their bread by avoiding sudden silence under the keel. Now comes a calm reconstruction of a night in Tortuga, a full day folded around it. Sunset finds the waterfront busy with small craft bumping alongside bigger hulls. Hawkers call out roasted meat, fresh water, tobacco, and cloth. Drums from an inner courtyard pull in a drifting crowd. A fiddler tries to carve a melody through the conversation. Prices are posted in chalk near the doorways of houses that act as taverns by night and stores by day. At one door, a rule is written in a rough hand: no blades at the table. Leave them with the keeper or keep to the yard. A sailor's pay cheat can buy a mug or a line of credit. The house keeps tally with marks beside a name and expects settlement when a captain sells prize goods or a share is paid. Inside, the noise rises and falls like a tide. Dice click, and so does a sharp tongue now and then. A fight sparks when a debt is declared, and the room tilts toward attention. But two men at the doorway step in quickly. One points to a board listing fines. The other points to the door. The night settles again. The films love the brawl that grows like a storm and leaves bodies in the street by morning. There were such nights. But more often, money chose the outcome. A merchant with powder in a locked chest could move men like chess pieces because he controlled tomorrow's gunfire. A captain who owed a set of rigging could not afford to be thrown out of the only house that would promise it by noon. Credit and reputation, not fury, often ran the room. The true gamblers rolled dice with information. A whispered sentence could turn a plan. A fat ship watered last week at the river. She waits for an escort that is 2 days late. That line changed more fates than a broken chair could. When dawn slides in, the island's market face appears. Smoked meat hangs from hooks. Cuts of fresh beef lie on boards. Barrels are pried open. Sellers angle for hard cash. But barter flows. Powder for tobacco, linen for salt, cloth for rum. The mid-morning lull is the hour of quiet deals. A boat builder measures a broken spar with a rope. A sailmaker checks a bolt of canvas by eye and callus. By afternoon, outfitting takes hold. A tired gun carriage gets a fast repair with fresh oak and iron straps warmed and hammered tight. A ship's boy carries a list from the quartermaster. Biscuit, peas, salt beef, a coil of new line, tallow, and a cask of fresh water. This is not a movie montage. It is the grind that makes those montages possible. Toward evening, music returns, but so does a ship's discipline. A bosun counts heads by habit even on shore. A savvy captain wants to know who will answer a drum at dawn. How did Tortuga get its reputation in the first place? Long before sailors packed into taverns, island hunters kept fires and racks for smoking meat. The Bocan gave a name, Bocaniers. They supplied passing ships with preserved meat, hides and tallow. Some were French, some English, some Dutch, some free people of color, some enslaved escapees carving out new lives along rough coasts and in hills that did not welcome easy patrols. Hunting turned into raiding when opportunity and danger pressed from both sides. Markets hungry for goods, and hostile patrols hungry for control. Mixed crews brought mixed skills, woodscraft, small boat handling, language for bargaining, and the stubborn courage born of living without safety nets. The films capture the look of a ragtag crew, but often skip the training that a mixed life produces. A hunter who can read a slope can read a shoreline. A woodcutter who can keep a blade sharp can keep a ship alive when gear fails. Politics on a sandbar sound like a joke. Until the letters and seals appear. Governors used Tortuga as a lever. A name like De Duran enters records often. A man who balanced royal orders with local profit and with the kind of pragmatic alliances that offend law and please survival. Letters of marque, licenses to raid enemies at sea during wartime, could transform a would-be pirate into a lawful privateer overnight. When treaties arrived, the same hand that had sealed the license might stamp out the practice and arrest yesterday's friends. Brethren of the Coast has a warm ring on screen, a brotherhood that answers only to itself. In reality, it was a shifting network of captains, crews, and backers who knew each other's names and grudges and cooperated when the numbers made sense. No rules in Tortuga makes a fine poster. The truth had more paperwork. Permits were sold. Fines were collected. Sudden crackdowns arrived with a courier's gallop and a letter that said the king had smiled at Madrid and expected everyone here to frown accordingly. Follow the money and a more exact picture of Tortuga's economy appears. Weapons, powder, shot, and flints formed a hard core of demand. Canvas, cordage, and timber repaired the logic of a ship. Food came in waves. Salted meat and biscuit kept men alive at sea. Fresh beef and fruit kept scurvy at bay on land. Doctors and barber surgeons were part of the market, with jars and blades that mattered more than good luck. Loot did not only mean chests of coins, it meant textiles, dyes, cocoa, sugar, hides, spices, tobacco goods that could be fenced quickly through agreed channels. Quiet partnerships with established merchants ashore made it possible to turn risk into ready goods. The films show mountains of coin because coin shines. What's shown to a quartermaster was a tally of barrels and bolts that would leave the beach by high water. Faces in the tavern line up with names in the record and with echoes that reach Hollywood. A figure like Pierre Legrand belongs at a table in this story. A captain said to have struck boldly near a Spanish treasure route with a small ship and a larger plan. Another named François Lolonais carries a reputation that often turns darker in detailed accounts. A calm telling acknowledges the brutality of the age, without dragging the night into gore. Roche Brasiliano appears as a swaggering presence in sources, a man whose temper and appetite carved his own legend. Henry Morgan's links to Tortuga, though more often tied to Port Royal and Jamaica, cross paths with the island in the traffic of men and goods. The films borrow traits from such names: the swagger, the luck, the grin at the wrong moment, the speech that feels like a toast. What the films set aside are the ledgers, the orders signed by a governor, the lists of shot and biscuit that made a ship swim fast and a plan turn from dream to daylight. Rules afloat ran tighter than rules ashore. And that tension matters here. Crew articles, written agreements, set out shares of prize, injury payments, discipline, and voting rules for certain decisions. A man who lost a limb might be promised a larger share from the next prize, a practical admission that a crew is a body that must pay its own wounded back toward a life. Discipline existed not to punish, but to make the ship predictable. Who stood which watch, who touched which rope, who had a say when and how. Shore freedoms could clash with that order. A captain who lost men to tavern credit might have to bargain with a tavern owner like a debtor before he could sail. The saga's pirate code is often treated as a single carved law. History shows a shelf of shifting papers, copied, revised, argued, and sometimes ignored when power spoke louder than ink. Still, the idea of rules is not a myth. It is a practical tool as essential as a good cable. Behind the party, a working yard hummed. Careening beaches form one of the island's most useful gifts. Shallow arcs, where a ship can be heeled over at high tide, braced against posts, and scraped clean at low tide. Worms and weeds slow a ship like sand in a clock. A week spent scraping, tarring, and patching can give back a knot of speed, which is the difference between escape and capture. Masts split, yards crack, rope chafes, canvas opens its seams, guns demand powder and shot, flints must be dry and plentiful. Smaller sloops and brigantines, with less draft and more agility, shine in these waters, not because they look romantic, but because they fit the place. A frigate's broadside frightens, a sloop's angle wins when the channel narrows. The films favor the blast and flash. The island favored the quiet grind that made a ship eager to run again. Recruiting a crew took more than a cheerful shout. In a doorway, a quartermaster carried a kind of ledger in his head. Who was sober enough to work? Who had a debt that would trap the ship at anchor? Who had a reputation for steadiness at the helm or a knack for repairing a sail in the dark? Promises were made, shares at set rates, advances to settle a slate at the tavern, a claim that a certain governor's letter made the plan lawful, which could sue the man who had no stomach for the hangman's answer to by what right did you seize that ship. Desertion cut both ways. Men left navies and merchant ships for Tortuga promises, and they left Tortuga plans when a navy recruiter's coin looked surer. The montage that shows a captain collecting hands in minutes sells tickets. The reality took days and used networks of trust that did not always fit on a scroll. Routes radiating from Tortuga reveal the rules ships obeyed even while breaking laws. Island hopping to Cuba, to the banks off Hispaniola's north coast, and into the windward and leeward passages placed raiders in lanes used by merchantmen. Shoal tactics made dangerous water into a friend. A pilot who knew which smudge of pale water meant a sandbar, and which meant safety held power that a cannon could not copy. Lee Haven's anchorages tucked behind hooks of land offered calm water to fix a rig or wait for night. Films often placed chases on open, featureless blue. Real chases worked on charts where arrows showed wind and numbers showed depth, and where a ship could win by making the other ship choose the wrong side of a point. Some of the island's most important workers did not stand on a quarterdeck. Women owned and ran taverns, traded goods, extended credit, and acted as information brokers without the formality of titles. Enslaved labor underwrote much of the island economy. Farming ashore, hard work at docks, carrying loads, cutting timber, moving water, cooking, cleaning and repairing. Maroon communities formed by escapees from slavery held land and knowledge that sometimes influenced raids, offered hiding places, or supplied those who could pay or persuade. The films underplay this reality or tuck it behind a chorus of jokes. A responsible reading of the past brings it to the front, calmly and without ornament. Power did not only wear a captain's hat, it wore aprons, carried baskets, swung adzes, and kept books. Food, drink, and medicine kept the island and its ships alive. Watering spots mattered more than good stories. Salted meat kept hunger down at sea. Fresh meat bought on shore kept bodies stronger between cruises. Rum required logistics, barrels and quality control, because a crew that drank spoiled or adulterated liquor paid a price at the worst time. Herbal knowledge in Caribbean hands offered remedies for fevers and wounds that European physicians sometimes ignored and sometimes learned. Scurvy, tied to the lack of fresh produce, haunted long voyages. Tortuga's proximity to markets made recovery easier than it was for ships far out. The saga frames grog as a comic lubricant. The daily ration was a measure as precise as a watch bell, watered for safety and issued with an eye on discipline. Violence existed, but had patterns that make sense on land, that wished to keep business running. Brawls happened, knives flashed, pistols banged in courtyards. Yet fights ended for reasons a magistrate would recognize. Fines paid, offenders expelled for a season, captains warned that a certain man would not be served until a debt was settled. Duels did take place. Rage finds ritual where it can, but the medical and legal fallout made heads cooler than films suggest. A man with a cut might not swing from a chandelier the next day. He might fester and lose his place on a crew. A tavern that let fights ruin profitable nights lost coin to a quieter house across the lane. Order was not a virtue sign hung for show. It was a revenue plan. When Spanish power flexed, the island felt the hand. Counterattacks came as raids on Tortuga itself, or as pressure on the coasts that fed it. Reprisals burned storehouses and scattered crews. The island's response was to rebuild fast, to lean on alliances with local French authorities when possible, and to shift the risk horizon outward by hitting where Spanish guards were thin and return lanes were thick with current. The saga loves heroic stands. The slower grind of patrols, embargoes and treaty talks shaped the island's fate more often than a single cannonade did. Messages crossed oceans. Months later, orders changed at Tortuga's gates. A tavern sign could swing 1 week and hang burned the next, only to reappear with a fresh coat of paint when the wind of policy shifted. Nature ended parties faster than any proclamation. Famine ashore meant fewer cattle and less grain, and the market emptied. Disease could sweep a crowded waterfront and remind everyone that coins cannot talk a fever down. Hurricanes arrived in season with the logic of the tropics, tearing roofs and scattering boats inland. Weather calendars lived in heads long before they lived in almanacs, and the island learned to read those months as strictly as any law. A bad harvest inland echoed in tavern silence. A storm season that arrived early took more than pride. It took masts, men, and memory. The long fade came from treaties and from the rise of other centers. Agreements like the Treaty of Madrid squeezed letters of marque and recast old friends as awkward guests. Naval patrols grew more professional. Other ports offered safer markets and stronger political shelter, yet the island's name stuck in memory and traveled into film because a place that turned reefs into a policy is hard to forget. The saga keeps Tortuga on screen after its peak because the symbol is useful, the moment when a captain can choose chaos and somehow find a plan inside it. What remains today are shapes that still read like the old map, headlands, bays, and the way water changes color with depth would be recognized by any pilot from the island's busy days. Fort sites, even when ruined, stand as punctuation marks on the shoreline. Archives scattered across libraries and collections hold maps, letters, and pilot books that explain why the island mattered and how decisions were made on ordinary mornings. A traveler who arrives with those maps in mind can walk the modern ground and feel the old lanes underfoot, not as ghost play, but as geography, doing what it has always done, teaching patient eyes how to look. 10 movie tropes line up easily for quick verdicts. Instant cruise? Partly true. Networks and money worked faster than formal navies, but days of promises and vetting beat hours of shouting. Endless rum? Off-base stores ran dry. Quality varied, rationing mattered. One-room government? Off-base governors, councils, and merchants pushed and pulled. Letters mattered. Universal lawlessness? Off-base permits, fines, and sudden crackdowns share the room with noise. Treasure mountains? Partly true, coin and bullion appeared, but textiles, dyes, and food made more frequent piles. Code carved in stone? Off-base, the code shifted by ship and season. Non-stop duels? Partly true, fights occurred, but the island preferred profit to funerals. Zero paperwork. Off-base pilot books, letters of marque, and tavern ledgers drove outcomes. Invincible broadsides? Off-base shoals and small drafts outperformed big guns in narrow channels. Magical escapes? Partly true, in spirit escape came from charts, pilots, and tides that did not care about speeches. Famous scenes in the saga: bottles flying in taverns, docks in chaos, jailbreaks that detour through a rope coil, governors looking the other way, take sparks from real practices and blow them into bonfires. Docks were crowded and messy. There were nights when the law blinked. A guard might be paid to listen to a story somewhere else. Yet compression hides cost. A crew breaking a comrade out of a cell had to handle chains, keys, and timing, and then had to sail on a tide that did not care about friendship. A governor who looked the other way used ledgers and letters to justify a decision. He did not simply wink. Before this hour closes, the film versus history lens swings back to the question that opened the door. How close is the saga's Tortuga to the historical island? And how did the real port actually work? The answer begins plain. The saga captures mood, crowded rooms, quick alliances, the music of a place that feels improvised. History adds the spine: governors, permits, articles, supply chains, and shallow water tactics that made raiding possible. The screen gives Tortuga a roar. The shoreline gives it reasons. The reasons are not complicated. Geography, policy, and habit formed a triangle that guided each decision. A quiet note ends the song. A small island bent empires with paperwork backed by reefs. The lens now turns gently toward the saga's most famous Tortuga sequences and lines them up with the shoreline that actually existed, so anyone who loved the films can keep enjoying them and also understand how the mechanics behind the noise truly worked. In one beloved scene, a captain stumbles from a small boat onto the dock, heads straight for a tavern, and begins recruiting a crew in minutes. As fists and chairs fly around the room, the feeling in that scene, fast, messy, and alive, matches the energy of a real Caribbean port on a busy night. What the scene compresses is the math. Real recruiting almost always attached to a ledger. A quartermaster kept track of advances, a tavern keeper tracked credit, and a captain promised a defined share backed by a letter of marque, if he had one. Information moved faster than fists did. A whisper about an undercrewed sloop, a rumor that a convoy had lost its escort, a tip that a certain governor would be lenient this month. The fist might start a story. The ledger ended it. Another familiar sequence shows a jailbreak that unfolds in one rush. A cell door opened by improvised trickery, a sprint through a courtyard, and a leap to the water where friends are waiting with a boat. The spark of truth here is the tempo. Real escapes had to move at the speed of tide, guard rotation, and luck. What changes in real life is the quiet groundwork. Keys were borrowed by corruption more often than by magic. A guard looked the other way because a debt was settled, or because a superior had reasons not entered in any book. The boat waiting in the dark had not simply drifted there in hope. It had watched the flag on the fort by day to judge wind, watched the harbor by evening to learn which patrol boat went where, and counted lanterns to read the night's pattern. The films tell the story with a smile. History adds the patient steps that make the smile plausible. The saga's shots of the dock lanterns, chaos, shouting buyers and sellers, ring true in their sound, if not always in their details. A real dock in Tortuga's busy phase sounded like mixed languages exchanged at speed, prices offered and trimmed, and the clack of tools, hammers on iron hoops, adzes on planks, mallets on wedges. Ships lay at anchor, according to draft and winged, not according to the best angle for a camera. Rowboats carried bundles of firewood, casks of water, and sacks of biscuit in routines that never needed to be named because they happened every day. A man might jump from a boat to a ladder in bare feet because wet wood held skin better than leather, and because he had done it 100 times. The films show an island that laughs at danger. The shoreline shows an island that budgets for it. A recurring film image, the governor who looks away while a pirate-friendly deal happens, belongs to a real habit, though the paperwork usually sat in between. When a European empire needed mischief done to an enemy's trade, a governor on an island like Tortuga sometimes found it convenient to encourage men who could do the mischief, so long as a letter of marque could be waived when the moment came to answer awkward questions. When treaties shifted, the same official could swing to enforcement. The films pin the change to a sentence and a frown. In life, the change rode months of letters across the sea and arrived with a new stamp and orders that used the language of friendship while tightening the leash. It is fair to say that the island taught governors to be both hosts and referees. The films simply accelerate the costume changes. Heads up on this. One of the saga's clever tricks is to place a joke or a flourish where real mariners placed a rule. A bottle flies, a laugh lands. The next moment cuts to a ship clearing the harbor at speed. In reality, a ship leaving Tortuga did not vanish into black water on a whim. A tide was chosen. A wind was measured. If the ship drew too much, a safer channel was used. If she was light and shallow, a shortcut through a cut or across a bank saved time. A pilot stood in the chains with a lead, calling out soundings, and a helmsman listened for the tone behind the numbers. The upward slide that warned of a bar, the sudden jump that said the channel deepened ahead. Films are free to clip the quiet parts. The island never clipped them, because skipping them was the quickest path to a broken keel. Now slowly, the scene-by-scene mirror broadens into a survey that travelers and film fans can carry in the mind like a pocket guide. When a film shows the tavern as the center of government, the responsible translation is the tavern is a node in the network. Decisions were not stamped there, they were shaped there. When a film shows the entire island erupting in a brawl, the translation is the island tolerated noise until noise threatened profit. When a film shows a captain lifting a mug and winning an army by charisma, the translation is charisma closed the sale that credit, shares and letters had already opened. This is not criticism of joy, it is an invitation to hear the harmony under the melody. Quick fact: even the most riotous image, bottles flying across a smoke-lit room, contains a practical shadow. Glassware cost money. A tavern keeper who let men throw profit at the wall would not keep doors open for long, so a fight thrown at full volume was often a signal that the fighter did not plan to pay tomorrow, or that a quiet sponsor stood outside with deeper pockets. Meanwhile, in another house, a dozen men drank from pewter mugs and talked about sailcloth weights and the price of shot. The films take the first room because it dances. The island lived in both rooms at once. Those who want to explore this subject responsibly, on paper or in person, can follow 3 gentle tracks. The first track is geography, a map of the island with soundings, currents and anchorages. Visible turns memory into something that can be felt underfoot. Coast shapes, headlands and the way water changes color with depth are classrooms that never close. A traveler standing on a point where wind presses the sea into cat's paws can read the reason raiders chose that side for shelter and that side for escape. Even if one never travels, a mind can stand there by looking at a chart and imagining a sloop pulling against a long, warm current. The second track is documentary. Pilot books, letters, port records and maps, preserved in libraries and archives, hold voices that do not shout. A line as simple as "water with caution, sand shifts at the mouth," says more about the island's logic than 3 pages of legend. A governor's letter with neat, looping script that reads, "License granted under condition that no harm be done to allies of the crown," explains why a captain treated one flag differently from another on a Tuesday in June. A tavern ledger, if one survives, turns rumor into a list, names, marks, debts, dates. This kind of reading does not require advanced training. It requires patience and an ear for how ordinary people left traces of their choices. The third track is living community. Modern residents make a place real. The island today is not a stage. It is a home. Guides, fishers, shopkeepers, and teachers carry the story forward. Heritage laws protect archaeology beneath and above the water, because a pocketed artifact is a paragraph ripped from a book. Respecting those laws is not a chore. It is a privilege, a chance to keep the past legible for the next traveler, the next student, or the next child who looks at the sea and wonders how anyone ever found a way across it. Responsible exploration looks like this. Ask permission before straying, listen to local advice before assuming, and leave the place as whole as it was found. With that foundation underfoot, the verdict becomes both calmer and more satisfying. The films are right about the feeling that Tortuga gave to a certain kind of sailor, that it was an engine of possibility. They are right that a captain could, in the span of a few nights, transform a plan into a crew and turn that crew into a voyage. They are right that governments played double games and that a room full of strangers could decide a fate. Where they simplify is where the island becomes even more interesting. Paperwork beats swagger. Geography beats speeches. Shares beat bribes. Careened hulls beat cannon in narrow water. The roar was real. The reasons were stronger. Let's take it step by step and settle a few more film images against the wall of history with soft, steady hands. The trope of endless rum turns into rationing that looked like discipline. Men were issued a measure that kept morale up without flipping the ship into chaos. And on some days the measure was watered to make it safer to drink and slower to vanish. The trope of a code carved in iron turns into paper rules that crews argued over and signed, with specific promises about injury payouts and vote timings. The trope of no one in charge turns into layered power, a captain at sea, a quartermaster on shares and discipline, a pilot on approach to tricky coasts, and a governor who could turn off the tap with a letter that arrived from thousands of miles away. Consider a final film moment. The instant when a smaller ship facing a larger one wins by cunning. In cinematic shorthand, a trick of timing or an unexpected maneuver saves the day. In the historical mirror, that trick started a week before on a beach where a crew scraped a hull clean, at a bench where a block was re-roped and oiled so it would not jam, and in a room where a pilot drew a line across a scrap of paper, labeled it safe at half-tide, and handed it to a captain who put it in a pocket close to the heart. Then, when wind and tide met on the appointed afternoon, the ship made the move that now looks like magic. The island did not deal in magic, it dealt in readiness. Because this episode promises a side-by-side tour, the camera, so to speak, returns to the start and walks back through the busiest parts of the narrative. With the new clarity, secure, on screen, Tortuga is a burst of color and sound that lets a complicated world feel simple for a moment. In archives, Tortuga is a set of coordinates, letters, articles, ledgers, and hard-won habits that turn danger into profit. On screen, the island is a permanent midnight with music in every doorway. In life, the island did mornings better than most people think. Canvas drying in the sun after a night rain, barrels being rolled, boats being caulked, a boy being taught to splice a line by a patient older hand, all of it so quiet that it would never make a script, and all of it so important that it made scripts possible. This calm verdict does not demand that anyone love the films less. It invites viewers to enjoy them more by knowing what they leave out and what they exaggerate. When a character in the saga jokes about rules while breaking a bottle, the informed ear can hear, beneath the joke, the creak of a ledger and the scratch of a pen writing shares. When a camera pans across a dock strung with lanterns, the informed eye can see, beneath the light, the shadow of a lead line swinging and wet with pale sand. When a director points a ship through a gap in a reef, the informed mind can imagine the pilot at the chains, calling, and a half-3, in a voice trained to keep men alive. To ease into the ending without hurry, a few more grounded scenes are laid out, each one modest and useful. A surgeon sits on a low stool near a door open to the air. He uses clean water in a world where clean water is hard work. A boy carries more in a bucket from a cask that was filled at a spring upriver that morning. He checks a wound that in a film would be shrugged off. In life it matters for weeks. He applies a salve learned from local knowledge that Europeans did not bring with them. In this one room, the island's connectedness shows an imported blade, a local remedy, a ship's need. A captain will make a decision later that many will celebrate. The surgeon's quiet work helps that decision succeed. A pilot sits in the shade with a piece of charcoal and a board plain smooth. He draws a headland and a bar with a channel that shifts with storms. He marks a safe line to run at half tide and writes a note about the color of the water in sunlight, pale green with streaks when safe. He does not think of himself as making history. He thinks of himself as making rent. A young sailor watches and asks a question that has been asked since people began to travel. How do you know? The pilot taps the board and says, by the ground under the line, and by how the sea talks to the hull. The boy nods and hears something he will remember longer than any brawl. In another corner of the island's day, a tavern keeper counts coin and cloth with a small smile and a sharper pencil. She thinks about which captains keep promises and which break them, and she sets prices accordingly, because experience is a map too. She hears a rumor that the governor has received a letter from across the sea and that the mood will change next month. She adjusts her credit to ride through the chain. When a customer jokes that the island has no rules, she smiles politely and does not answer, because her rules keep roofs on and food in the house. At the fort, a guard drills with a small militia. He does not look like a film's villain. He looks like a man who has been told to watch a channel and to light a signal if he sees a certain flag. He would rather be at the market. He knows the names of 2 sailors who will be on ships he is supposed to stop next week. He holds both facts in his head at once because he lives here, and islands make experts in doubling. He will carry a message home tonight about a change in watch schedule, and his friend will tell a cousin who repairs boats, and the news will pass, as it always does, through the riverways of ordinary talk. By now the hour has circled the island more than once. The final steps gather the thread so the close feels like the calm of a harbor after a breeze falls. Tortuga did not thrive because it was wild. It thrived because it was useful. Its usefulness looked wild on camera because practical work seen from outside and from far away often does. A ship made fast, a pilot paid, a ledger signed, a hull scraped, a letter sealed. Those are quiet pictures. The loud pictures were always built on the quiet ones. A brief recap sets the compass for the last time. The opening promised a film versus history tour and delivered a map, a day's rhythm, the real meaning of taverns, the machinery of letters and articles, the difference between swagger and shares, the importance of pilots and shoals, and the shape of power, when it wears no uniform. The films gave the island mood and momentum. The records gave it coordinates and consequences. Together they draw a line smooth enough to follow. The camera fades. If a camera is imagined on an evening not unlike the one that opened the door, music rises from a doorway, thin and tasteful in the warmth. Lanterns pool, yellow light on boards scrubbed with brine. The harbor wrinkles under a late breeze and then goes still. Farther out, two ships lie head to wind, each with a different plan for dawn. One carries more guns, the other carries more knowledge. No speech is needed to tell which one will be lighter on the water when the tide turns. The bell strikes in a fort where a guard looks seaward and thinks about home. A pilot folds his scrap with the safe line on it and puts it into a pocket near his heart. A tavern keeper bars a door and builds tomorrow's list in her head before she sleeps. A final sentence, steady and soft, brings the hour to a close. The saga captures the roar, and that roar is fun. History provides the reasons. The movies gave Tortuga a roar. History gives it reasons.